He didn't walk away from a crown because life was soft. He walked because life refused to stop breaking people. Kingdoms ate kingdoms and called it destiny. Castes pinned labels on babies and called it order. Every victory needed a loser to make it shine. Somewhere between a king's promises and a beggar's last coin, a prince stared at the math of suffering and saw that it never balanced. Power wasn't fixing anything, it was protecting the problem. So he did what no one expected from a boy raised on silk. He left comfort behind to face pain on purpose. That single choice will tangle his fate with a thief who can slip into the minds of animals, a slave boy who climbs a forbidden ladder, and a giant who believes he's a monster until someone shows him his reflection. If you think this is a legend about miracles, you're half right. The other half is about consequences. The warning arrived as a dream. A white elephant with 6 tusks stepped into Queen Maya's sleep like moonlight that remembered how to speak. Priest nodded, reading the pattern the way sailors read currents. Generals smirked at omens the way men smirk at anything they can't stab. High in the hills, a monk felt the air tilt and told his disciple to watch the south. A great one was coming. Down in the markets where hunger is louder than poetry, no one cared about symbols. Kosala kept pressing on Shakya like a tide that never tires. Borders shifted, taxes rose, fires found any excuse. And in the alleys where dust and debt meet, a boy named Chopra ran errands for men who bought mercy by the handful and sold it by the grain. Chopra's life was a ledger that never turned black. One mistake and his owner would sell his mother. That wasn't a threat, it was a schedule. He ran faster, bargained harder, fought boys twice his size because fear has a way of making you brave. Then he met Tada, a smaller kid who laughed like he'd seen this trick before. Tada could do something the city didn't have a word for. Slip into a tiger, ride a horse from the inside, steer a locust swarm like wind. People called it witchcraft when they were afraid and luck when it saved them. He called it surviving. He watched Chopra fall, then did the most dangerous thing a poor child can do. He cared, not because it was wise, but because pretending not to hear someone drowning is a slow way to die yourself. War doesn't wait for childhood to finish. Kosala's banners bloomed over the horizon like a field you don't want to walk through. Tada's spirit went into a cavalry horse and turned order into chaos. He used panic as a lever the way other boys use sticks to pry up stones. In the mess, fate offered Chopra a choice that tasted like metal. He had the hated general in his sights, watching crocodiles circle. One throw and the river would do the rest. Justice would feel like gravity. Then he saw something colder than the water sliding past the man's boots, a path out. Save the general, and gratitude might be the rope he could climb. He dragged the man from death and sold his anger for a chance at a different life. Tada hated the deal. He'd seen ladders greased with other people's blood, but he followed anyway because being betrayed together feels safer than being safe alone. The city taught Chopra to smile with a swollen lip. Arenas adored his ferocity, noble balconies adored his bow. The rescued general called him son, a word sweet enough to numb the old bruises. Chopra learned the choreography of rising. Win clean, speak carefully, hide the one truth that could end him. His secret wasn't crime, it was birth. He was Shudra, the caste the system calls dirt so it can excuse stepping on faces. If that word surfaced, the same mouths cheering his name would spit it out like poison. Upward motion charges interest. You pay in fear daily until the collector asks for something heavier. Chopra kept winning anyway. He won until even enemies leaned forward when he moved, until ministers measured him like a blade they wanted to own, until marriage proposals came wrapped in politics and perfume. Every gift carried a warning label he couldn't read until it was too late. Far from the cheering, a different boy tried to ignore how tight silk can feel. Siddhartha, prince of the Shakya, learned the math of kingdoms. Train hard, harden your heart, don't look long at anything that bleeds. Then a friend sank into mud while adults argued about schedules and blame. Siddhartha carried the small body himself. Something cracked that day. Tutors tried new lessons, new weapons, new distractions. None could teach him how to walk past suffering without turning his head. He slipped out of gates meant to keep the world away and met the world anyway. He watched hunger count ribs like beads. He watched sickness take a family apart in slow motion while neighbors pretended not to see. He met Migaila, a girl who said what she meant and smiled like a dare. She didn't fit any category the court respected. That was enough for power to notice. Power hates what it can't sort. Bandaka, the king's favorite hammer, proved he was useful by being cruel. Siddhartha married a princess with hands that shook from pressure, not fear. A son was born. Joy like sunrise, worry like a long shadow. Duty said, build the wall higher, sharpen the swords, feel nothing. His heartbeat said, what if feeling is the point? The river between kingdoms became a stage again. Banners faced banners, arrows asked questions no one wanted to answer. Bandaka painted poison on iron and called it efficiency. Chopra carved through the fray like a name, trying to outrun its past. Siddhartha rode in circles, trying to talk men out of dying with a voice that sounded ridiculous on a battlefield and was somehow still heard. Then the world held still for a blink. Chopra met Siddhartha's eyes and felt something impossible. Pity aimed at him, clean and bright, in a place that smelled like iron and fear. His arm faltered, poison didn't. He collapsed. The fight remembered its lines and continued chewing. Cities remember their appetites. Judges polished sentences until a mother's execution sounded like maintaining order. Chopra begged for her life with the same voice he used to win crowds. He offered exile, humiliation, his own head. The law decided an example would keep the streets quieter. The cliff took 2 bodies and returned an echo. Tata watched from the sharp edge where grief becomes a vow. His childhood ended right there, not with age, but with rage. Somewhere else, Siddhartha stood over a sleeping kingdom and realized that if he stayed, he would be reforged into the very blade he feared. So he stepped into the night, shaved the crown from his head, and left a message for the wife who loved him. I will return with an answer, or not at all. The forest does not flatter men. Ascetics welcomed him with rules that sounded holy and felt like knives. Pain is the door, they said. Suffering is the proof. Depa burned his own eye to show sincerity the way a fanatic throws gold into a fire to prove he hates money. A child named Asaji traced days onto trees and smiled as if brevity were a game. He said he would die by the 5th trunk. Prophecy can sound like play until the moon rises. Wolves do what starving mothers must. Siddhartha found what was left and wept the way any brother, any father, any human weeps when the world doesn't pause, just because he finally learned how to care. He dug deeper into pain, thorns under skin, sand over skin, storm inside skin. At the bottom of that well, he found not enlightenment, but a body learning how to fail. Then a stranger offered soup with hands that didn't know they were feeding the future. The first sip hurt. It tasted like a sentence he had been avoiding. Healing is also holy. Migaila was dying in a shack that smelled like smoke and last chances. Tata's hands shook. Depa called compassion a distraction, a soft lie that weakens the will. Siddhartha knelt. He put his mouth to poison and made a different trade, his strength for her breath. All night he chose the pain that fixes something. Morning broke on a face that didn't believe in miracles and now had to. Siddhartha looked at the forest that ate men and said the quiet part out loud. If you can relieve suffering, why worship the suffering? Why measure holiness by scars? He walked into a clearing and spoke to animals like neighbors. Nature consumes to live, humans consume to win. If pain is a currency, we've been trying to get rich. He stepped off the tightrope between pleasure and punishment and found a road with dirt under it, a middle path with room enough for people to walk together. The trees didn't argue. They've seen more theories than kings. Elsewhere, a giant named Yadala tore down gates with one hand and brought food with the other. He called a queen mother because he remembered what it felt like to have one. The prince of Kosala, Verhaka, born with Shakya blood the court called unclean, signed orders with a hand that trembled and told himself shaking is what leadership looks like when the world is sick. He burned the women to keep a plague from crossing a threshold and named it necessity so the scream in his head would quiet down. Yatala fled with the queen and failed to keep her alive. He buried her with hands that could throw elephants and couldn't lift grief. He walked into a river and asked the water to finish the job. The water refused. He begged thunder to smash him. The sky stayed silent. Then, deep in the trees, he saw a glow that wasn't fire. He found a monk whose quiet didn't sound like defeat. I'm the saddest man alive, Yatala said. Siddhartha didn't argue. He didn't hand him rules. He handed him a mirror. He watched Yatala list sins like beads, then pointed at a ledger the giant had never been allowed to see. Lives saved, gentleness offered, fear absorbed, so others didn't have to carry it. Somewhere else, Verhaka knelt at a grave he had ordered into existence and clawed at dirt with bare hands, begging for a name only his mother could say. Between the giant and the prince, 2 versions of strength faced the same question. What good is power if it only protects your worst story about yourself? Yatala asked if he was allowed to live after everything his hands had done. Siddhartha said yes, not because destiny needed him, but because people did. Dawn doesn't ask permission. It pulled gold from a horizon that had almost given up and gave the monk a word that wasn't a crown or a warning. Buddha awakened. Not finished, not perfect, not untouchable. Awake. That's all the day needs from someone who plans to spend it differently than yesterday. He didn't float above suffering. He waded into it and learned how not to drown. If this were a simple hero myth, we'd end here with trumpets. But awakenings are for mornings. The day still has work. Chopra's name lingered like smoke. More boys would try the same ladder and fall in the same place unless someone changed the rungs. Tada's grief cooled into purpose. He understood now that revenge can feel like breathing and still suffocate you later. Migaila, who lost her sight to someone else's lesson, taught everyone else to look with better eyes. Yadala, who thought he was a beast, learned the sentence he'd been denied since childhood. You're allowed to be kind and strong at the same time. Even Bandaka, the court's favorite blade, proved something without meaning to. Cruelty is efficient in the short term and bankrupt in the long term. It builds empires that crumble fast and takes men with them. The Buddha didn't fix the world with lightning. He started changing the math. Pain divided by 1,000 hands becomes bearable. Compassion multiplied by courage turns into law. He spoke to rulers in the language they understood, consequences, and to beggars in the language they needed, worth. He taught that you are not the sum of what's been done to you and you're not trapped by what you've done. You can become useful to the very lives you once harmed. It isn't softness, it's power you don't have to apologize for. He told soldiers that the hardest thing to lay down isn't a weapon, it's a story. He told ministers that a stable kingdom needs fewer enemies, not better prisons. He told parents that love is a practice, not a promise. And people listened because finally someone wasn't trying to win. He was trying to help. Back in Kosala's courts, Virhaka tried sleeping with victory beside him and found it bit. He had freed the slaves to look merciful and discovered mercy isn't something you put on like a cloak. It's a habit you grow or you don't. He kept waking at the hour when language fails and only pictures remain. Fire, a wall, a face he called mother through his teeth. He wanted to punish someone for how small he felt. The list of candidates was long, counselors, foreigners, the weather. But then he remembered the look in the monk's eyes, how it felt like they were disappointed in his fear and proud of his pain at the same time. The disappointment stung, the pride burned. It was the first time he considered that being feared and being respected were two different roads that never meet. Tada, who once used his gift to frighten soldiers and flip camps into chaos, began using it to move herds away from farms before a harvest, to lead wolves toward deer when they were desperate enough to look at children the wrong way. People called him a saint when they were grateful and still called him a witch when something went wrong later. He learned not to keep score. Migaila taught children that tenderness is a kind of strength that doesn't need an audience. When they asked why cruel men live so long, she told them the truth she wished someone had told her. Cruelty feels like control until it empties you out. It leaves a ring where your heart used to be. If you win that way, you still lose. News of the awakening spread like water downhill. Some wanted to test the Buddha, to bounce riddles into his lap and see if he could juggle. Others wanted him to pick a side in wars that were older than anyone in the room. He refused the easy theater. He sat with the ones who couldn't stop shaking and the ones who didn't know how to say they were sorry without sounding like liars. He spoke in stories short enough to carry and heavy enough to matter. He described the mind the way a patient tracker describes wind. He called greed thirst and taught people how to drink without drowning. He called hatred heat and showed them where the shade was. He called confusion fog and walked them to higher ground. And yet he didn't erase grief. He didn't erase rage. He reshaped them into tools. Rage became a shovel for digging truth out of lies. Grief became a rope to pull others across. Love stopped being a word that makes poets rich and started being a verb that makes communities possible. When enemies walked into the same room, he didn't ask who fired first. He asked who wanted to be free. It turned out both did, but only one was willing to do the work. That was enough. Freedom isn't a treaty, it's a practice. In the corners of the story that most retellings skip, small lives changed, and those changes mattered. A guard who once bragged about how many backs his whip had tasted learned to set it down and use the same hand to lift a man to his feet. A village woman who had grown used to boiling her hope away with her rice started saving one bowl, the first bowl, for someone else. A merchant who cheated at weights for 20 years switched the stone for a true measure and slept like he had discovered a new kind of pillow. None of them became famous, all of them made the world easier to breathe in. The hardest part of waking up is what comes after, staying awake. The Buddha knew he could not hold the world alone. No one can. So he taught people to hold it with him, then with each other, then without him. He refused to be the bottleneck that doomed his own message. He wasn't building fans, he was building adults. When rulers begged for tricks to keep their crowds docile, he offered them a boring miracle, justice. When warriors begged for blessing so arrows would fly straighter, he offered them a harder miracle: restraint. When parents begged for guarantees, he offered them the only honest miracle anyone can promise: attention, repeated daily until it looks like love. All of this began because a boy once buried a friend without knowing how to keep breathing afterward. It continued because a thief chose to help instead of sneer, because a slave boy saved a man he should have let drown, because a woman who had every reason to shut her heart threw it open anyway, because a giant believed a monk who said, "You matter," because a prince felt shame and chose to listen to it instead of weaponize it. Every hinge that turned this story wasn't magic. It was a small human choice made at the right time. If this sounds naive, check the scoreboard. Every empire that called cruelty realism is a paragraph in a book. Every act of mercy you choose today will never be out of date. The opposite of despair isn't comfort, it's connection. A stranger's bowl, a friend's promise, a giant's second chance, a mother's last blessing, a prince's first apology. The world doesn't turn on miracles, it turns on moments when someone chooses to make the hurt smaller than it was a minute ago. That's not shite, it's the only move we've found that keeps paying out. So we pause here, on a road with room for more than one set of footprints. The awakening isn't an ending, it's a deadline. There are wars to cool, laws to rewrite, mothers to listen to, boys to pull from rivers, giants to teach how to sleep without nightmares. There are lotus flowers under mud that still think the mud is all there is. If you've ever wondered what to do with your hands, start there. Lift someone an inch, share the weight for a minute. Refuse the story that tells you the only way to live is to win. The prince who walked away didn't abandon power, he invented a better kind, and the door he opened is still unlocked. Step through it and bring someone with you, because the only real victory in a world built to break us is learning how to make each other whole. And that, more than any throne, is the kind of strength that outlives the man who found it.